April 1862. My dearest Dawn, it is a sleepy, desperate night here at the front. The blackbirds have collected in the grass, gathering the scraps of whatever it is that Cookie concocted for our troop's supper that was purported to have been food. As the sun sets over tomorrow's battlefield, I allow my mind to wander to what seems like a mere fortnight ago, when I was standing at the foot of your great stairwell, listening to you and Lady Jennifer discuss the delicate principles and procedures associated with the cutting of fine woven quilt fabric.
Yeah, see, and that's not coming out.
Look at that.
Yeah.
That's a
not
whole
coming
row
out.
of wrinkles.
Right. So that means that just because I have these together and they're straight, doesn't mean my fabric is straight.
If you choose to pre-wash, if you don't happen to like the crinkly look that you get when you wash a quilt that hasn't been pre-washed, this will reduce that crinkly look quite a lot.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my fabric so that it's on a solid line here. So I know my ruler is now perpendicular to my
straight to the grain.
To my fabric.
Which is what you want.
Correct. Then I'm going to look up here and make sure my fold. Now my fold is right here, and it's not going to be easy for you to see, but I can see it. And I'll look across there, and yes, that is straight on.
In the glint of my mind's eye, I recall to my vision your beautiful quilts hanging in your library. And I am inspired once again to awaken at the dawn that bears your name, to Rotary cut our way through the enemy lines and separate the rebels from their selvage, however you say it. In your honor, from our lips will be uttered the battle cry that you instructed to us. Ironing is a no, pressing is a go.
Yeah, we're gonna have merch.
And we shall,
we're gonna have merch
indeed, press forward. Yours most affectionately, Corporal John King Richards, Company F, 19th Maine Infantry.
Now, you like creative grids.
I do.
And I like...
Let me move out of your way.
Show my rulers. But I used... When I first started quilting, I guess I better get them. I used to buy... Omni-grid rulers. And I like them because you can really see the markings against dark fabrics or light fabrics. They really show up quite well. However, they slip and slide. So that was always an issue for me. Recently, I discovered Quilters Select, and they have a frosted back, which is kind of like with the creative grids. They've got those frosted dots, and this frosted back prevents it from slipping. It literally grips your fabric, and you just it can't move. It can't slide. And sometimes I have to physically pick it up to adjust, because it just doesn't want to slide. And so that's why I like that. But it's important from a fairly non-technical reason to purchase one brand of rulers and just go with that.
How in the world did you know? That's exactly what I was thinking. I was thinking, okay, I'm going to come over to Jennifer's house, and I'm not going to tug all my rulers along with me. I'm going to come over to Jennifer's, I'm going to cut out a quilt, and I'm going to use her rulers, okay? Because she has all Quilter Select, and they're fancy and schmancy, and I think that's pretty awesome, and I don't get done. And I go home, and I don't have any Quilter Select rulers. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to come over to Jennifer's another day and finish cutting out my quilt, because I'm not going to mix, because the lines are different on all the rulers.
The way the rulers are marked, it's not like any particular ruler is inaccurate. They are all accurate.
Correct.
And they all 1 inch is a 1 inch on this ruler is the same as a 1 inch on that one. But the way I line that ruler, that line on my fabric or off the fabric in order to get the exact 1 inch is different based on how the manufacturer put markings on the ruler. So
Right.
you get used to that when you buy a particular brand, and you know exactly how to place it, how to use the lines appropriately on your rulers to get the accurate cut. And if you switch back and forth, it's like switching from imperial to metric. You're mixing the different measuring systems, and you're just going to get all wackadoo in your head. It's just not appropriate.
Well, and the thickness of the line is going to vary from ruler to ruler. Now, when you lay your ruler on your fabric, is the fabric edge on this side of the line, or is it on this side of the line? And the line is,
Yeah. Or is it exactly dead?
Well, the line is so little you can't really see if it's dead center.
But it could be in theory.
Right, in theory.
So the way you use those lines to line up cutting will vary just slightly based on the way they were placed on the rulers. And each manufacturer has its own way of doing things. OmniGrid has one, Creative Grid has another. And they all will show up slightly differently against your fabrics. Here's the one I like. So you need to find what works for you. And then I do advise that you buy a complete set of those rulers and consistently do that. What I do with these now is I keep them here in the studio, so I always have rulers handy if I need to demonstrate something. But the ones I really like to use are the Quilters Select.
Now let's talk about the lines a little bit. So see, I can see right now that Jennifer's lines on her ruler are much thinner than the lines on my ruler. Okay, so if I were to come over and use Jennifer's ruler, I'd be off a thread.
Or
maybe
more.
a thread or more.
Yeah, and you would think, oh, well, who cares?
But when it's 20 pieces, that's 20 threads.
Yes, and that
Get your fabric and cut and count 20
adds
threads.
Up. It adds up, and it can be significant.
Yes.
To the finished size of your block, to the finished size of your quilt. It can mean things won't match up. That's why
the smaller you get, the worse it gets if you're off a
Yeah.
little bit. You have to be, the smaller you go, the more accurate you have to be. Okay? So, fabric is forgiving. Let's not scare the wits out of you. Fabric's very forgiving, and the perfectionists in us demands that we use the same ruler. I mean, that's just us.
What I found, quite honestly, is that it just makes my life easier.
It does.
I'm all about easy.
Yeah.
I want things to be made to the best of my ability. I want them to be as perfect as possible.
And that's just us. We're just crazy that way.
But also it kind of it removes a lot of headaches the more accurate you can be.
But some people don't care. I mean, they just want to do it.
Or they just want to finish
and
it.
have
That's fine.
fun. That's right.
Yeah,
That is right.
And maybe it's not fun actually thinking about
all
the lines
accuracy
on a ruler.
Right.
But it's what we do think about.
Right, we do. So anyway, so what I'm saying is that Jennifer's eye is going to get used to these lines and these markings. And she's going to know right where her 1/4 inch is, 5/8 of an inch. She's going to know with her eye. My eye is used to this. And so I know where my 1/4 inches are. I know where my 1/2 inches are. I know where my lines are for this because that's what I'm used to. And people think the more lines, the more confusing. But this is a line with 1/8 inch markings. Not all rulers have continuous. See, this one has an 1/8 inch marking, and
But
this
it
one
doesn't
has
have
an 1/8 inch
yeah.
marking, but they're not continuous. So you can get rulers with lots and lots of lines, but you've got to train your eye to use them. You've got to train and know that, yes, these are every 1/8 of an inch and how all that works. And so once you get used to it, it's really it's just secondhand. You just know what you're doing. And so I think that's another reason.
And these are awesome for when you need to cut those odd measurements.
Right,
like
7/8,
or
5/8,
7/8, whatever.
3/8.
Or, very small measurements like you would use for miniatures.
Right.
So really
Right.
nice to have that
very
kind
few
of
people
thing.
probably have a use for a ruler this many lines, but because I do a lot of small things, I do love my 1/8" rulers. But again, this will do everything. This'll do. This'll do.
Yeah, it has like this little white dashed
Yeah,
line.
they may not be able to see that, but yeah. And hers has a little dashed line on the
that
quarter
helps
of an
you.
inch. Right.
That helps you if you're
Lining
trying to cut at an 1/8. But it's not a continuous line like the ruler. I think I would like to show them the next step in cutting, which is after you've cut your strip. Typically, the next thing,
Subcutting.
you're subcutting. So we might want to cut a couple of strips. I thought I'd cut a 2.5-inch strip.
Okay.
Just like I did before. I mean, just like you did.
Okay.
So
you're not really going to cut right 2.5 because that line, we have manipulated this fabric and it's no longer straight.
And you can see that it's...
Yeah, it's no longer straight.
Yeah, there's not a straight edge there. So I'm going to just make sure that lining a strong horizontal line on this fold here.
And then looking up here at her fold up here. See the fold, how you can see it's just pretty much straight along that line.
So we know
it doesn't land on the line, but you can see it's evenly distributed across that line.
Yeah. And then looking at the raw edges, I know that I've got more than 2.5.
You're over enough that you're going to encompass all the fabric underneath.
Cutting first is safety first, so make sure you don't expose the blade until you're ready to use it.
She's talking about a rotary cutter.
So I've on this one I just have to push it down with my thumb. Now it's exposed and I can get cut. And then you put your hand in a kind of a spider formation or whatever. You're trying to hold it in place.
Now wait, stop right there. Are you putting the pressure here on your hand? Are you putting the pressure on your elbow? Or are you putting the pressure on your shoulder, or all three?
I've never really thought about it, but I know I've got pressure evenly on all my fingers. I don't feel like I'm pushing necessarily with my elbow. I don't know. I feel like it's just kind of one solid thing. I don't feel like it's pinching my shoulder or my...
No, it shouldn't pinch, but your strength is coming from your shoulder, and your pressure, your strength. You're using your shoulder as your strength. Your elbow is the position that you're cutting, that you are putting your fingers down on. So it's slightly bent. And then your your fingers are distributed so that you get the biggest area of weight.
Pressure.
That would be the word we would want to use.
Yeah.
Pressure.
Because I'm not really pressing with my fingers.
No.
I'm just
holding it steady. But
I don't know. I haven't really thought about it.
Yeah.
But it is, I guess.
The weight is coming from here. Okay?
From my shoulder.
Right.
So I'm holding the ruler firmly. I'm going to open up the blade. And then you do what you call set the blade, which you bring it right up against the edge of the ruler. And then I've got my finger on top, which helps.
There's some little gripper things there that hold your finger in place so you don't slip and cut yourself.
So it's just helping me guide the ruler.
Is your blade going this way, or straight?
Straight.
Yeah, straight.
So you set the blade, you've got your grip, you start cutting with a smooth motion. You shouldn't really be applying any pressure on this hand because the rotary blade should be fairly fresh.
If you find yourself putting more pressure on your rotary cutter, it's time to change the blade.
Also listen, you should get it kind of a crisp, whooshy yeah, like that. And if you're hearing kind of a or some resistance, that's telling you your blade's getting old. Anyway, just like Dawn said, when I get even with the top of where my hand is, I no longer have stability. So I will. You can spider walk it up if you want, or you can just simply move your hand up to.
Do you feel that pressure in your shoulder the minute that you almost started to cut? Can you feel that weight in your shoulder? If you put the weight on your hand, you're going to get this carpal tunnel-y stuff, okay? So make the pressure come from your shoulder, Okay? And your hand is just to stabilize it.
You're right. I really didn't pay any attention to before where the pressure's coming from, but it is my shoulder and not my hand.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I'm going to continue going up the rest of the way. And then I immediately close. And then because I've been talking, I probably didn't get a really smooth cut. So let me, there. And that's the sound you should, there.
She didn't eat her babies this morning.
And we pull it away to make sure that we've gotten a clean cut before we do anything with moving the ruler. And then I, as Dawn did, I just pick it up. I now know that I have a clean edge here, so I'm going to
What
measure.
are the chances that's going to get distorted versus if you had to turn this whole thing around?
Oh, I know.
It getting distorted.
But that was how I think I was first taught to do.
I think I was too.
And oh my goodness, that just introduced so many issues. It wasn't until somebody showed me this technique that I was like, duh, that's so much better, so much easier. So let me get this lined up.
And again, we're not using the lines on our mat. Sometimes we would have to, but this is not one of them.
There's something happening with this.
Because you just changed that blade.
I know. So who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe it's an older blade. Anyway, so now we have this one and we have this other strip. And I guess we have a third one.
Yeah.
So you've cut them whatever the pattern says. The pattern may not tell you to do this, but both of us do this. We cut our largest pieces first. So if we need to cut, say, an 8.5 inch square or something like that, I'm going to cut an 8.5 inch strip and then subcut off of it the 8.5 inch squares. And then I'm going to cut the next smallest size.
When I get my pattern, I sit down with a pencil and I actually go through the cutting. And I go, okay, it's talking about the white fabric first. And I go through the whole list of what they want. And I will find the biggest cut and I'll put a 1. And then the next biggest cut and I'll cut a 2. And the next biggest. Now, some people write their patterns where they cut the biggest first. And that's just a joy. Yeah. But some people don't.
No, they don't.
And so if you start with the smallest and you're chopping into your fabric and something happens, if your ruler should slip or something should happen, and you get down to a small piece of fabric and now you need an 8.5 inch and you don't have one because you've had to readjust and do some things.
You've had to trim off a bit more.
If you didn't buy enough fabric. Yeah. But if you start out with the biggest one and you don't use the whole strip, then whatever's left over, you can subcut from it. So if you need a 4.5 inch square and you've used up some of your strip and you've got some left over, you can cut those 4.5 out of the
you can cut it out of
leftovers.
the 8.5 inch strip if you didn't use all of it. I mean,
right.
I do that.
I do
because
too.
Because I want to be frugal and try to use up my strips if I can.
Right.
So anyway, I would just recommend cutting your largest pieces first and then going to your smaller, because if you run out of fabric, it's going to be for a small strip, and there's a very good chance you'll be able to get those last few squares or rectangles or whatever it is you're trying to get
out of your leftovers.
Out of your leftovers from the other strips.
Yeah.
And not have to go back. Sorry, I do support quilt stores, it's great, but having to go back to buy like another eighth of a yard.
If you've got a prefab.
I know, you can't,
kit.
There's no place to go.
Yeah, because you don't know where that fabric is.
So cut your biggest pieces first.
Correct.
Now, do you want to show us how you would subcut?
No, you go right ahead.
Okay.
Now, I have two methods of cutting. I have stand-up cutting and sit-down cutting. Okay? And I usually I call it my grocery list when I have my pattern and it's listed all the ingredients for the quilt. That's my little grocery list. And I just love that's probably my favorite thing to do is cut my grocery list.
I love making checklists and checking things off.
So same thing.
It is my favorite thing to do is to just check.
Mine too. I love that.
I will create a list.
Yeah,
so I can check things off. Honestly, my husband looks at me and goes, "What are you doing?"
Yeah. So I always have that pattern right here with my pencil, and I'm always double checking and going back and forth and seeing. And so then all that grocery cutting is done standing up at my cutting table. Okay? But if I have a bunch of scraps and I'm just going through my scraps and I'm just cutting squares and I'm cutting them down into functional pieces, I will sit and cut. Or if I'm squaring up, or if I'm doing like half square triangles and I'm trimming them or whatever, I have sit down cutting and stand up cutting. So does that make sense?
It does. I think, though, it's important to say that for safety, you are more safe cutting when you're standing up than when you're sitting down.
Did you see I stuck my tongue out at you?
I will when we replay this.
I guess you will.
But yes. But the truth is,
I thought you were going to stick your tongue out.
No, the truth is, I cut also sitting down. But just know that you're not as stable. So accidents will happen. And I would tell you, the thing you do not want to have happen is for this blade to come in contact with you. Let's say that again.
If you like your 10 toes and your 10 fingers.
You do not want this blade to come anywhere close to that, even if it's dull.
Oh, duller is worse.
It is.
Yeah.
Dull, actually, since we're talking about safety, dull forces you to put more pressure on it.
More chances of slipping.
And the last thing you want is this sucker, when you're doing this, to slip off and come over here.
Yeah.
But it will if you're putting a reckless amount of pressure on it. And so
Don't be reckless.
Don't be reckless.
Okay.
So anyway, so you don't want to do that you don't want to cut with a dull blade. So so I've got my 2.5-inch strip.
Okay.
And
it's folded in half, so there's 2 layers of fabric underneath you.
Yeah. And this is how I cut.
Okay,
this is how I subcut.
Let me see how you subcut.
So here is the selvage, and we already talked about that. You don't want that. Let's say I was going to cut a 2.5-inch square. So what I'm going to do is use the same method. I'm going to use strong horizontal lines on either side of this to line up. And then I'm also going to cut more than I need, because this little bit here, the selvage, and a little bit close to the selvage is going to be that thick, heavily woven, stiff, unusable fabric. So I just want it off of there. So I'm going to just make my cut, and then I'm going to again, there's something wrong with this blade.
I don't know.
That's a funny thing. I
would offer you to use mine, but if you've not ever used one of these ergonomical ones, they take a lot of
getting used to.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, so I turn it around and then make my next cut. Yeah, you can hear that.
Yeah, you can hear that it's not sharp.
It's not sharp.
You know what happened was she was in the middle of changing it for the demo here.
When you arrived. And
I arrived and interrupted her. I bet she never got it. I bet you never got it changed.
I must have put the same blade in there.
I bet you never got it changed.
I bet. Yeah. So I'm so embarrassed. But anyway, so now I've cut 2, and I've got a clean edge here, so I can just continue to cut down here 2.5, 2.5, 2.5.
Right. And did you see how the fabric that she had that she was cutting, the measurement she was cutting, is all under her ruler?
Right. Because again, that gives you a lot more stability.
Right.
Now, have you ever heard of power cutting? Or
yes, I have heard of power cutting.
And so let's say I need to cut a whole bunch of the 2.5-inch strips. You have to think backwards, and you need a bigger ruler than this one.
This is exactly why I don't do it, because you have to think.
So let's say I wanted to cut, you just cut in multiples of the thing that you're cutting. So I'm going to start with 10, and I'm going to line that up, 10, and then I'm going to make a cut.
And why 10? Because 2.5 goes into 10 even, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Times 4. So I cut that one. And then I move my ruler. I pick my ruler up and I go to the next.
She's looking at this end.
Measurement. And
the next
multiple is 7.5. So I put my ruler on 7.5.
It'd take me a half an hour to figure that out. Plus I'd have to get my calculator.
And I make a cut. And then it's over here at 5. And
by that time, I could have had 40 2.5-inch squares already cut.
And this is power cutting, baby.
That is power cutting.
So with doing nothing more than just moving my ruler, I now have these 4 sets of 2.5-inch squares cut. So that's power cutting. So feel free to do that if you like. Now, I don't know. How do you feel about cutting multiple strips? Do you do that? And how do you do it?
I do that. She's saying that instead of just cutting one strip, she's got 2 strips and they're both folded in half. So when you put them together, they are now 4. And some people are comfortable cutting 4. Some people are comfortable cutting 8.
Well,
and I'm going to tell you that the newer your blade, the better chances you have of cutting multiples.
For sure.
If your blade is dull at all, you're not going to have success.
Like this one, I'm not going to attempt it.
Yeah. But as you can see, this is now off a little bit. See how I've got these laid? They look like they're laying perfectly straight, but they're not. So it's not as easy as you would think. So what I do is like a deck of cards or a pad of paper, and then I take my ruler and I lay it up against there.
Clever girl.
And
That's a neat way to
I just kind of massage it into place so that this is straight. Now, if you want to make sure it's completely straight, you can use the lines on your mat. And then you just come in here with the lines on your mat, the lines on your ruler, and there you go. Now, I know that that's all completely straight.
Now, if I'm going to cut more than 4 layers, I'm going to use a bigger rotary cutter. That it's easier with a larger rotary cutter to cut, like, say, 6 or 8 layers. I don't typically do that, but, you know, if you're going to attempt it, I would use a larger rotary cutter. This is a 60 millimeter. Your standard is a 45.
And let's show them why it's easier. Because see the depth of the blade on these two? See how this one is a shorter depth and this is it exposes more of the blade. So you can cut thicker layers. More layers, thank you. More layers of fabric than you can with this. Because the ruler, of course, is going to take up some of that room. So yes, definitely if you get more than 4, I would go to a bigger rotary cutter. So now I have all this ready to go. I'm going to move it closer to me because who wants to go like this when you can get it all closer to you?
Yeah, plus you might want
to forget your belly bump.
Feel free to switch to your ruler
if
you want to.
What I would do is the same thing. Now that's gotten off a little bit. So I use my ruler. I just ease that in, ease on down, ease on. Here's my 2.5. I've got it at about 2. I've got it at about 3.5 over here. So that gives me quite a bit. I'm gonna expose my blade. 2. So now I have 4 layers. I'm power cutting, people, because I got 4 layers under me.
She's cutting 4 at a time.
Again, I'm making sure that my strips are within my 2 diagonal lines, and I'm just going to go 2.5, 2.5, and see, Jennifer's brain is thinking, what's the next increment? 7.5, 4.5, 9.5. Where am I going? What am I doing? I'm just doing 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5. And I've got a boatload of these while she's still thinking. So there you go, because I'm not a power thinker. And I've got perfect 2.5-inch squares. Yay, raw.
I do not typically use the power cutting method.
Okay.
Because I'd rather just keep cutting the same size. It's just easier on my teeny tiny brain.
Yeah.
But it is an effective way of cutting a lot of stuff.
And I think there's books out there that give you the charts.
Yes, and it's also a little bit safer.
Why are we screaming?
There's more of your...
I started screaming. You started screaming.
I guess because she did. I don't know. We both got loud.
We did, didn't we? Okay, let's calm down.
Well,
it was all that thinking we were doing.
We were so excited.
Yeah, we were.
But doing the power cutting method may produce better results for you because the majority of your fabric is under the ruler, giving you a lot more stability as you're making your cuts. It gets a little bit smaller as you go down, but unlike cutting all of them at this, where there's just a little bit under the ruler, for most of the cutting, there's a lot under the ruler. So So there's a reason for doing it. I guess I just don't bother. I just cut 2.5. But anyway, that's called power cutting if you ever want to try that.
Okay.
While we're still on safety, just again, you release the blade right before you go to cut, and then close it as you're done cutting, and then put it off to the side. Get into the habit of closing your rotary cutter blade, because the next thing you're doing is this.
Yeah.
And as you're spreading your fabric like this, you're going dangerously close to this open blade if you haven't closed it. So make sure you do that.
I feel like you should be wearing, we're both wearing glasses. I was going to say, I think we need the safety glasses.
Listen, we already talked about listening. It should be a whoosh, and it shouldn't be a sound like this was making.
You just did that for example, so that you could show the people what a dull blade does.
I honestly think
that's probably what you were doing.
I honestly think my new blade is upstairs.
I think so too.
I think what I did was I just put it back in because I wanted to open the door. Oh well. Also, though, while we've got show and tell, let me bring out. If I bought this when I was teaching my daughter to quilt, and
how old was she?
7, 8, whatever.
Yeah.
She was younger, and she has her mother's nature, so she's cautious and safety first and all of that. So when it came to the rotary cutter, she was sort of afraid of it and didn't want to hurt herself. So you can purchase these. These are called, it's called the Klutz glove, and it's by Fons and Porter.
How come I don't have like a dozen of those? I'm such a klutz.
You put it on your non-cutting hand, and it is a cut-resistant, it's kind of like almost like it feels weird. It's almost like a steel, whatever, inside, and it's cut-resistant, so that when I'm cutting, whatever I'm cutting, if the blade accidentally comes off, it can't hurt me. So this glove is a nice thing, I think, for kids especially.
You need some for your feet too, because how many times has this fallen off the table and you're thinking, oh, I hope I still have 10 toes.
I jump if that ever happens. It doesn't typically happen, but I do jump out. I totally jump out of the way.
If there was some wood in this room, I would knock on it, because I have never cut myself with a rotary cutter.
Neither have I. So
yeah. So I guess all of our cautions and our safeties.
We're very cautious people. So
what about your machine, your needle in your machine? Have you ever?
Okay, I've nicked my finger with it, and that scares me. Yeah. But I've never actually sewn through like my nail. I can't. Yeah. It just makes me.
I know, that just gives you the willies.
Have you?
No, but that? Tammy has, and in front of me, and I screamed, and blood was everywhere, and I just couldn't handle it. So
that would be
that'd be the nastiest.
So exceptionally scary.
Keep up on your, what are those shots called? Tetanus. Keep up on your tetanus shots.
For sure. That's funny. I just watched an episode of Call the Midwife, in which one of the characters cut his hand, and they asked him if he was up on all his jabs, and he said yes, but apparently he hadn't had his tetanus since like when he went to serve in the war, and so he ended up getting lockjaw, and it was scary. I was crying. I mean, if you've ever watched Call the Midwife, every single episode makes you cry.
Oh, my husband cries at commercials.
Yeah, I do.
Do you? Okay.
Stop it. I do. What can I say? So that's what we wanted to cover today for cutting accurately, and I know it's a lot. And frankly, it's so much that we've decided to make this also a 2-part podcast episode. So you're going to have to wait 2 weeks to get the second part, but we'll be back. I know, darn it. But we'll be back with more tips and tricks for how to cut accurately.
We're going to focus on specialty tools for the next one.
And tools, and also special cutting situations and how to solve them.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Both with safety and accuracy.
Let's do that.
So we'll see you later.
Until next time. Bye.
Bye.